We've been studying the book of Philippians, and I've had the privilege of being able to pop in now and again and pick up verses here and there. And the last time I spoke at the Bible study, I covered a couple of verses, and then Pastor Frank came to me afterward and went, "Hey, did you talk about this when I'd covered some previous verses?" Like, well, no, because I was moving on. He goes, "Great, because that's an Eastery kind of a thing." So Pastor Frank has taken us a kind of rabbit trail loophole all the way back to where we started for some of this and then gone forward again. And I get to pick up right where I left off, which is sort of weird because it's almost like I was just covering this material. If you remember the last time I was here, we talked about Philippians 3:14. I press toward the goal for the prize of the upward call of Christ Jesus. We've got that idea that Paul loves races. He's into athletics, specifically the 100-yard, the marathon, those kinds of things. I think Paul was a fan of the Olympics. I think the Olympics were a real thing back then. That's where they started. I think Paul followed these because he constantly talks about racing. He goes on in verse 15. We're not covering these today. I'm just reviewing. Therefore, let us, as many as mature. Mrs. D, if you're around, I picked up Pastor Ronald's mic, and I can hear the reverb in there. I sound really cool, but I sound like I'm at the bottom of a can, too. Or you could get me a different mic. I'm sorry, this is the only one I had. Therefore, let us, as many as are mature, have this mind. And if any of you think otherwise, God will reveal even this to you. One of my absolute favorite recent discoveries in the Bible. I've read this verse before, never noticed it before. I love the way Paul just throws shade on the people who go, well, I'm not sure I agree. Paul's like, that's okay. God will show it to you eventually that you're wrong. Ultimately, it's God will reveal this to you. If you don't agree, God's going to show you. I love that. That is such a great way of doing that. You just drop the mic and walk away. Nevertheless, to that degree which we have already attained, let us walk by the same rule. Let us be of the same mind. He's talking about unity in the body of Christ, working together, having the same mindset, working for the same purpose. That's what we've already talked about. So we're picking up, if you're new to the Wednesday night Bible study, we're picking up around verse 17 of chapter 3 of Philippians. And to reiterate what Pastor Frank has been telling us, we made the observation already that the first chapter is all about having joy even in suffering. Not a thing we normally expect to find joy in, right? But we've been through that. Then the next chapter was all about joy in service. Joy in service, doing good and finding a sense of accomplishment in all of that. The third chapter has been joy in maturing, growing in Christ, okay, being who you are yet to become, okay, growing into the person you will one day be, right? So joy in service, joy in suffering, joy in maturity. And this is the wrap-up for this chapter. Now again, remember, if you are a student of the Bible, you probably already know the numbers, the chapters, all that, that's all added later. We came in and we broke it down so it was easier to find. We do the same thing to Shakespeare. Shakespeare didn't have numbers on his. There was no Act 3, 2, none of that. That all gets line 4. That all gets added to help us find to be or not to be. Okay. For us, the Bible gets broken up into these chapters because they're manageable chunks. The people who did that, godly men seeking the Lord, not the writer of the scripture, okay? So we don't really have Paul saying, and now I will transition. But the people who broke Philippians up do a pretty good job of recognizing the thematic breaks. So that's something Pastor Frank has already shared with us. Let's take a look at what this first set of verses talk about. He says in verse 17, oh, it's up there, good. Brethren, join in following my example and note those who so walk as you have us for a pattern. Follow along. You have a pattern, right? Follow us. We give you a pattern. If I could, I'm going to just briefly take you over to the NLT for a second just to put this in more modern English. The New King James Version is pretty good. It's got a lot of really great stuff. I love the poetry of it. I love the Shakespearean nature of the King James. But every once in a while, there's grammatical things that just throw us for a loop. Okay? It's not a bad translation. It's actually very accurate. It's a word-for-word focus. But a lot of words have changed their meaning since the 1600s. And even in the New King James, which was a re-establishment of the way the King James was written, we lose a little bit in the grammar. Okay, and I've been an English teacher. I know I'm a history teacher. I've told you that a lot before, but I've also been an English teacher, and I can break it up, but sometimes I'm like, I'm trying to figure it out myself. So here we go. I'm going to give you a different translation of that. Dear brothers and sisters, in the NLT, dear brothers and sisters, pattern your lives after mine and learn from those who follow our example. Brothers and sisters, pattern your lives after mine. Ooh, okay, now we go back to the New King James. Now you can understand how it works. Join in following my example. Follow my example. Do what I'm doing. Okay, Simon Says, put your hand in the air. Okay, moving on. Basically, he's giving them a Simon Says instruction, right? So Paul says, we've already been talking about my credentials, chapter 2. We talked about the service of Timothy and Epaphroditus. Those are the ones he says here that are following our example. Okay, there's two people he said, these are great examples. These guys got it going on. You can do what they're doing and you will be great. Okay, it's kind of like the teacher who says, well, if you're studying and you're having some difficulty, let's talk to the kid who's getting the A+. What are you doing to study? I had a teacher one time actually do that. I really shouldn't run the rabbit trails. I have so much here today. I have a ripcord, though, so that if I run long, I can jump to the end. I know where to do that. I had a teacher one time. I had written a short story, and I made some spelling mistakes, but all in all, it was pretty good, and all in all, everything was there. But there's this one kid who just kept picking on my story. He was critical and critical and critical. And he was pointing out minor little things. But I just sat there. I was very intimidated. This is awful. I didn't realize I was that bad of a writer. So the professor took his story next and destroyed him. It was so awful it was like watching a car wreck in slow motion. But at the very end, somebody said something about all his terrible spelling. And the professor actually said, maybe you want to ask Rick what spell check he's using, because his is better. Ooh, I'm sorry, rabbit trail was just a little memory for a moment. Follow my example, he says. Follow my example. But aren't we not supposed to do that? I mean, doesn't the Bible always talk about we don't follow men, right? We're not supposed to put people up on that pedestal. Oh, they're amazing. Isn't that, there's a word for that, idols? We talk, I idolize that famous movie star. Oh, I idolize that sports star. Oh, I idol. Oh my goodness, where's that word come from? That's not a good word at all. I want to be an American idol. Oh no. We're told not to do this. And if we're coming from a Protestant background, we're probably sitting there looking at a specific branch of Christianity going, that's what they do. They put them too high up there and they worship them and so on. And they may not be worshiping, but if you put someone up at that level, is that not the definition of worship? They can do no wrong. Remember when you were little, your best friend, you probably still do this today. I'm just kind of like helping to lower the barriers here. When you were little, your best friend could do no wrong. Somebody would tell your best friend did something they weren't supposed to do, and you're like, well, I'm sure there's an explanation for that. I'm sure there must be. But that kid that stole your pudding, you heard about them getting into trouble, like, I'm not surprised. Right? In fact, if you heard about that kid right now, a kid in kindergarten, you know the one I'm talking about, and you heard that he just went to jail, you'd be like, I thought so. But if you heard that your best friend in kindergarten, the one who liked you, the one you played with all the time, you haven't seen him in years, just went to jail, like, I wonder what happened. It must be a misunderstanding. We're ready to defend those people we idolize, unreasonably so. And, of course, we're willing to, villainize anyone we don't like, often unreasonably so. But we're told don't follow men. That's like creating idols. Let me give you some examples. Psalm 118, verses 8 and 9. Okay, this comes back to the Old Testament, we're told. We're warned about this back in the Psalms. It is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. It is better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in princes. You know men are going to drop the ball, right? Sooner or later, the person you depended on isn't going to be there. But you were supposed to, but they didn't show up. But the bus didn't arrive. But this didn't happen. Oh, no, it rained and nobody came in. People fail. Don't put your confidence in men. Paul says, follow my example. But Paul, what if, oh, no. We're idolizing someone if we only follow their example step by step. We're given the warning about why this is a bad idea. Jesus himself, these are red letters. It's Matthew chapter 15, verse 14. I'm going to have you jumping tonight. I'm sorry. I'm jumping all over the place. Matthew chapter 15, verse 14. Let them alone. They are blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind leads the blind, both will fall into the ditch. Okay? Now, this is not dealing with people who are disabled in any way whatsoever. He's basically saying certain people probably shouldn't offer to help when they have the same problem. Okay? Ultimately, if the blind person says, "Here, follow me," that second person has no idea that the person he's following doesn't know where he's going. Okay, I have an image of like a seeing eye dog with dark glasses. You know, it's a blind dog. He doesn't really know where he's going. He's just going to sniff his way there. Okay, the blind lead the blind and say, "Come with me." You don't know where you're going. You go off into the ditch. Okay, when somebody's like, I was actually somewhere one time in a hotel, and they were renovating something, and we kind of turned a corner, and we ended up in a section. Nothing was open. Like, we should not have been there. There was all construction stuff. Like, we got out the elevator and like, oh, this isn't right. And the guy that was in the elevator with us, like, well, this way. And okay, and we ended up like further into the construction area. And eventually we were in like this abandoned parking lot. This is like really weird. And finally the guy's like, "I have no idea where we're going." Like, "We were following you." He goes, "I don't work here." Like, we had to backtrack our way all the way through. I have no idea why a hotel would allow people to go around like that. They should have some sign somewhere. The blind leading the blind, we're told, and both fall into the ditch. In 1 Corinthians 1, 10 through 13, I'm going to bounce around on this one a little bit. I've got just some points I want to hit on it. But we're told that the one we're supposed to follow, of course, is Christ. It starts in verse 10. Paul says, "I plead with you, brethren." And then, again, English teacher, I'm not cutting out scripture here. I'm just jumping to the point of the sentence. Okay, I'm cutting out clauses and phrases. "I plead with you, brethren," and a little further down, "that there be no division among you." Everything between there is a subordinate clause, so it's going to, in the name of Christ and so on. It's all good stuff. But for our point, "I plead with you, brethren, that there be no divisions among you." Verse 11 starts with, "For it has been declared to me," a little later, "that there are contentions among you." He's writing to the Corinthians, and he's like, "Hey, guys, I've been hearing about you. I've been hearing you've been bickering. I've been hearing you guys have been fighting a little bit amongst yourselves. You can't be doing that. I don't want to hear about divisions among you." Okay? Now, I guess it could be and let's face it, human beings, we are contentious. We will find anything to stand on. I mean, you can make a mistake, and then someone calls you out on it, and you'll stick your heels in and like, that's what I meant to do. That's what I was trying to do. But if you find somebody who actually likes a thing, and somebody else is just not having it at the moment, oh my goodness. Starbucks coffee, Dunkin' Donuts coffee. There's like a cult around those two, okay? Six Flags or Disney, Coke or Pepsi, the Yankees or the Mets. And we know there's like one is biblical and the other is Pastor Frank's favorite. Ooh, I don't even care about sports. It's just too easy to throw that out there. Basically,
Testing one.
After all, the majority of the New Testament was written by the Apostle Paul. And the Mets are a good team. Let's just make sure that's clear. But he said, quite honestly, your faith, because he wasn't identifying, your faith ought to be called Paulinism. Yeah, the young Christian in me was like, we're going to throw hands. Okay, no. But that's exactly what Paul is talking about here. Some people are from Paul, some people learn from... And Paul says that's not how it works, okay? This is dangerous to emulate others like that. Don't you be a Paulit, okay? Early Christian Great Awakening period. Awesome man of God. His name is George Whitefield. He's an Englishman who came here as an evangelist in the early days of the colonies. This was even before George Washington, okay? This big revival takes place in America. He goes up and down the coast from Georgia all the way up to Maine. Okay? George Whitefield runs into a guy in Boston. He is fairly famous by this point. His sermons are being printed in the newspapers. Everybody knows him. He's the Joel Osteen, the Billy Graham of his time. Man sees who he is, calls his name, and he hears this guy yelling, George! George! George Whitefield! I'm one of your converts! The man is drunk as a skunk. He's barely standing. He's teetering. He smells of liquor. Everyone sees it. And here's this guy loudly calling out, I'm one of your converts. Yeah, that's got a sting, okay? It's like, shut up, go away. Can you imagine Pastor Frank being accosted by somebody in New York? I've been a Christian ever since I heard you speak the first time. Oh, no. Everybody's laughing. Everyone's snickering. I'll tell you something about George Whitefield's character. George walked up to the man. He looked him up and down, and he says, of course. You have the look of one of my converts. Everybody else is like, the what now? He's like, sadly, my friend, if you had been a convert to Christ, you wouldn't be in this situation. See, if you're a follower of George Whitefield, good luck. But if you're a follower of Christ, now that's something to count on, right? We're told not to do this. And Paul goes, do what I'm doing. Wait, you're not supposed to do that. And in fact, just in case you're wondering here, Paul is not so full of himself as to think he is the second coming, or something like that. Paul knows he's got flaws. He talks about them in some of his writing. As we read through Paul's writing, earlier in Philippians, we were told, I'm not going to jump you through these, we were told in Philippians chapter 1, he said, I am in a strait betwixt two. I'm undecided. I want to do this, but I want to do that, but I want to do this. Can anyone relate? Paul sometimes didn't know what to do next. He wasn't decisive, I will do this. You ever make a purchase and then you just hold the receipt for a day or two just in case? I bought Christmas presents I didn't open for a few days just in case I want to, never mind. Paul knew he was prone to pride. This is kind of interesting. This is a guy I just said, he's not so full of himself, but he knows he wants to be. That's something to be aware of in your life. If you know you've got I really want to do that thing I shouldn't do, but I'm not going to, you've got a victory there. But if you don't know that's your weak spot, I guarantee you don't have a victory there. You're going to be jumping all over it. Paul talks about his thorn in the flesh in 1 Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, he talks about something called a thorn in the flesh. I'm not going to get into what it is, who it is, or anything like that. But the point is, Paul starts by saying that the reason for this thorn in the flesh, whatever this obstacle in his life was so that he would not be exalted above measure. In other words, so I didn't get a big head, I've got to deal with this. This keeps me from getting arrogant because I could get arrogant. If you read American history, you can read about how George Washington says he had a really, really intense temper. He writes about it. We don't really have any accounts of George blowing up. We do have one record of Thomas Jefferson saying, I saw him get really mad one time. But ultimately, we don't have any public displays of George Washington. People tired of him walking off because he held it in check. He knew his weakness, so he gritted his wooden teeth. No, they weren't wooden teeth, they were ivory. He gritted his teeth, and he just dealt with it. He knew I could blow up at any moment. Paul knew I could let this go to my head, and I could be sitting there going, that's right. Paul, led more of them to the Lord than Peter. That's right. Paul wrote more books of the Bible than Peter. That's right. Paulism. Paul knows that's a possibility. He's going to be careful about that. He knows he's flawed. He actually goes all in the book of Romans. In the book of Romans, some of us, we went through the book of Romans a little while back on Wednesday night. Remember that? Anyone there? Okay, we got some people. So we went through the book of Romans. In Romans chapter 7, you can bring this one up. Romans chapter 7, verse 15. He says, "For what I am doing, I do not understand." Maybe you've been there. I keep doing stuff, and I don't know why. Okay, for what I am doing, I do not understand. For what I will to do, that I do not practice. The thing I willfully say, I will do this, I don't. But what I hate, that I do. In another translation, it's basically, why do I do the things I don't want to do? Why do I keep getting drawn into, I don't want to do this, and I do it, but I know I need to do that, but I'm not gonna. You know, he's a member of Procrastinators Monthly. I don't do the things I should do, but I keep doing the things I shouldn't do. Okay, probably don't need this story, but I ran into someone when I was a fairly young teacher. I was still like my first or second year, and an adult, it wasn't a parent of a student, it was actually his pastor, had come in to complain about something that we had done. I don't know why he cared, but he felt that something was not being addressed properly, and he wanted to talk to me, the teacher. I'm still practically just out of college myself. I was a little intimidated, but he talked to me about all this stuff, and he said something about how Christians do not sin ever. And I got a good pastor. I've been taught, but I'm like, And he's like, never, ever, ever do Christians sin. Like, well, okay, are we going by the whole, once you've been forgiven, it's forgotten and it never happened? And he's like, no, if you sin, you're not a Christian. You would not, if you were, and I pull his verse out. Like, well, the Apostle Paul says, why do I do the very thing I don't want to do? The thing I should do, I don't do. The thing I don't want to do, I do. Paul says, sometimes, man, I struggle, and sometimes, and he even goes further, and you can go into the next verses. He says, it's in verse 17, he says, it's the sin that dwells within me. Verse 19, he says, for the good that I will to do, I do not do, but the evil I will not to do, then I do practice. The thing I say I won't do, I do. And the thing I say I should do, I don't, and so on. So I'm like, what about that? And he looked at me, I swear, you don't need this story. I'm still telling it. He looked at me and he went, that was before he was a Christian. And I looked at him and I honestly said, Paul wrote Romans before he became a Christian? And he said, Paul wrote that before he became a Christian. I said, Paul wrote Romans before he wrote, God let a non-Christian write Bible? And the conversation it went in circles, and I do remember him looking at me going, he said something about, well, it seems to me we're not serving the same Jesus. And I went, I'm sure of it. I was like 21 years old, and this guy was like this adult. I'm like, I have no idea how that church turned out. Okay, I'm sorry. I just forgotten all about that, and it's just coming up in my head now. The thing I want to do, I don't do. Now, side note here, I'm not going to go into the reason for Corinthians. I'm just using this as an example of Paul knowing his weaknesses. The fact is, Paul is using this to demonstrate we are saved from our sin. And he's essentially in Corinthians going, even me. Do you understand? You can't put me on that pedestal. Even me. But we're not going to go into the whole, and then Christ saves us. That stuff we'll do in another night. Okay, so I'm going to take you a little further here. Look at that. I'm actually turning pages tonight. Woo. Okay. Those of you that are new are like, what's he talking about? What's the big deal? Trust me, that's an amazing thing. We're 2 pages down. Okay. The point is, our point in all of this is the guy we're supposed to emulate? Go back to verse 3, the verse we were covering, verse, was it 18, 17, in chapter 3 of Philippians. Paul says, act like me. But elsewhere, Paul says, man, I'm a mess sometimes. So I should sin and do the things I don't want to do, even though is that what we're supposed to emulate? No, of course not. Okay, my little ripcord thing says, jump over here if the time is good. Okay, I'm going to go a little ahead here, and then I'm going to come back to where I left. I told you I left a trap door just in case. Someday, one of these days, I'm just going to open up the Bible and say, what are we doing today? And I don't know that I'll be able to pull it off, but I'll bet I can cover a lot more verses. Oh, man, the Lord just shows me all this neat stuff, and I just want to keep going on one verse. Okay, Philippians chapter 3, verse 18. We're going to jump to verse 18. We're going to jump out of 17 to we're going to the second verse. It's going to be a good night. For many walk, of whom I have told you often, and now tell you, even weeping, that they are enemies of the cross of Christ. For many walk, of whom I have told you often, and now even tell you, weeping, that they are enemies of the cross of Christ. Now, we can read that kind of quickly and make an observation. There's phonies out there. There's frauds out there. Yes, brother. They've seen people do it, so they mimic them. Okay? Now, I don't know who the first preacher who talked like that was, but I'll bet he was a man of God. It's the ones that we see on the TV shows that are just copying it, and now it's a joke that are these people he's talking about. They're mimicking the wrong thing. They're following the wrong thing. For many walk, of whom I have told you often. Apparently, this has been a conversation he's had with the Philippians before. There might be some folks in the Philippian church. Like, you know who I'm talking about? He doesn't call anyone out here. And don't think Paul's not afraid to, because beginning of the next chapter, he's going to call two people out by name. But he's not going to call anyone out. But he's like, I think you all know what I'm talking about. There are some folks that act like this. I've warned you before. They are the enemies of Christ. But here's the thing. He's weeping while he tells you. Paul's not like, guys, how stupid are you? Look out for the frauds. Some of them aren't frauds. Some of them aren't fakes. Some of them are just hypocrites. They're in the church. How do you know that? Because he said they walk. They walk the walk. These are people who've been in your congregation that are deviating. They're slipping away because they want to do things their own way. I've told you often, don't fall into that trap. Don't follow them. That's a danger for the Philippians. That's a danger for us today. And I tell you, weeping. That's why he's weeping. He knows these were believers who are deciding to do things their own way. Well, I know I'm supposed to do this, but as Paul points out, sometimes you do the thing you don't want to do. It's just what we have to do. Nothing I can do about it. Boys will be boys. I'm only human. All those excuses. And Paul says, it makes me cry. Paul doesn't weep over the pagans. Paul weeps over the saved who fail to follow through. And Paul says, they are enemies of the cross. He doesn't say they're going to hell. He doesn't say, I hate them. He says they're fighting against what Christ has called us to be. They are the phonies, the frauds, the hypocrites who walk their own walk. Now the question is, he's telling us this. He's told us before, watch out for this. Don't be this. Don't be tricked by this. How would we possibly fall for that? If somebody comes along and they're not following this example, wouldn't we recognize it? If somebody comes along and they're not acting like Paul, and we still haven't gotten to why in the world we're allowed to follow an example of a person, but if they're different than Paul, shouldn't we all go, well, that's not the same thing? How are we falling for this? Go to 2 Timothy. 2 Timothy, verse 3 of one of the chapters in Timothy. I don't know which one. I have no recollection of which chapter it is. I just realized my notes are wrong. It's 2 Timothy. It's verse 3 of one of the chapters. It starts with, for the time will come. Thank you. It's chapter 4. The time will come when they will not endure sound doctrine. He's talking to Timothy about the end of things, the end times perhaps, maybe just later in their own history. He says, there will be a point where people will not listen to sound doctrine, not they can't hear the doctrine, solid doctrine, correct doctrine. But according to their own desires, because they have itching ears, they will heap up for themselves teachers. Now, it's not in quotes, but it probably should be given the context. These are teachers. These are smart people. These are degreed philosophers. They're going to surround themselves with people who tell them the thing they want to hear. That term, itching ears, it's an idiom. We know it today. We still use this idea, but they would have recognized it at his time as well. It basically means my ear's itching. I want to hear something I like. I want to hear what I want to hear, okay? So, I was thinking about, tax day, just came through, and I was thinking about, maybe, taking a religious stand and saying, I'm not going to pay my taxes. You can't take money from me. I think I can do that. What do you think? He said, okay, what do you think? Does anyone want to say yes? Oh, I like it. I'm going to do it. You're right. You convinced me. Okay, nobody over there did that. I'm just kidding. I'm just pointing. Oh, we say we want to do a thing, and then we go around asking people's opinion, and they're like, no, I understand. Yeah. No, yeah, you're right. And we keep asking until finally someone goes, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. I thought so too. Thank you. There's my confirmation. If I ask enough people, one of them's going to say what I want to hear, right? Okay. Or it could be the other way around. I don't want to do a thing. I'm like, oh, you should do it. No, I don't. I need to apologize, but I don't really want to apologize. No, you should apologize. You don't need to apologize. I didn't think so. People search out something that will tickle their ears. Ooh, I like that. That lets me do the thing I want to do and not feel guilty anymore. I can do those things that I'm told not to do, and it's all covered under the blood. It's all right for me to do. It's okay. They're going to look for that in the end times. Well, we've always looked for that sort of thing, haven't we? They're going to heap up onto themselves teachers. They're just going to go from person to I thought the mic went again. They're going to go from person to person to person until they find the ones they like to listen to. People believe what they want to believe. They've decided ahead of time. Now they just need someone else to say, sure. And that's their confirmation. He then says in verse 4, they will turn their ears away from the truth and be turned aside to fables. It's a fairy tale. It's so wrong. It's not even true. And you're like, oh, that's the thing I'm going to do because the teachers told me to do it. I found someone to give me the advice I wanted to hear. Probably shouldn't tell this story. I'm a teacher. I deal with students all the time. I had a student some time back, but it's someone that I don't want word to get back to him, but I'm going to tell you the story anyway. It's too good. A student came to me, had a problem. Okay, it wasn't a personal problem. It was a problem that a friend was having, and they wanted to get involved. They asked me for some biblical counsel. I gave them biblical counsel. Stay out of it. It's none of your business. That was my biblical counsel. It was the only thing I could say. This is not something you can get involved in. It has nothing to do with you. If you get involved, you are meddling. This is not, and I backed it up with the Bible, okay? Just, this is not about you. Stay out of it. But if you want some more counsel, Ms. Dumas is trained to do this. Go down and talk to Ms. Dumas. She's our principal. Go talk to her and see what she says. But I'm telling you, I'm pretty sure the right answer here is back off. That's all. Went down to talk to Ms. Dumas, caught up with me later in the day. Said, I talked to Ms. Dumas. She gave me the same advice you gave me. And there's a part of me like, same advice. Do you have any other advice? I almost laughed in her face. I couldn't believe, are you kidding? You don't like my advice, so you're asking me to change it. I don't have any other advice. That's the only advice I can give you. And it's the same advice someone else gave. I have no idea how many more people the person went to ask. I'll bet sooner or later they found someone to tickle her ears and like, yeah, get involved. I don't know. I don't know how that turned out. It was a while back. Okay. So people will look for those fables that they're going to follow. The short version is, as human beings, we all want the paycheck without putting in the hours. It would be awesome if we could get paid but not have to go to work. But that's not the way the world works, and it's certainly not the way God's world works. Okay? You've got to put the work in, then you get the benefits. We also learn from Paul here that it does not end well for these enemies of the cross. It does not end well for them. Frauds, fakes, hypocrites. He says in verse 19, whose end is destruction. Even the ones who, well, I follow Jesus, but I want to do it my way. Their end is destruction. I don't know if that means hell, but I know it means things don't go well. We can at very least settle on that interpretation, okay? Maybe skin of the teeth into heaven, but either way, it's not going to go well in their lifetime, Okay, they're going to be miserable because of these actions. Their end is destruction. And then he goes on to say, because their God, or rather whose God is their belly. In my belly, that's where I want it all to be. I want to just eat it up and then, oh, I feel so good now. Their God is their belly, and whose glory is in their shame, and who set their mind on earthly things. There's the flaw. They set their mind on earthly things. They're not looking at the heavenly things. They're looking at the here and now. They're looking at, but I'm not happy. You know, but she was mean to me. I don't have to put up with that. I deserve respect. All those things may be true, but if that's your goal, if that's your end goal and you achieve it, whoop-de-doo. They apologize. Ha! And what does that do in the face of eternity? How have you accomplished anything for the cross of Christ? You're all about you now. It's all about me, God. It's not about you. It's the wrong song. You don't have to worry about stuff like that. Let God worry about taking care of you and avenging you and so forth. Paul says their end is in destruction. Their God is their belly. Okay? It's all the same. They follow the belly, not the spirit. They follow their personal desire, the thing they need, the thing they want. Now, that's not to say if you're hungry, you shouldn't eat. I mean, I cut my finger, I put a Band-Aid on it. I don't sit there going, well, God will take care of it. And I'm squirt, 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 squirt. You got to stop the artery from bleeding, right? Well, arteries spurt, or veins bleed. Okay, weird analogy. They're following just the physical, the belly. They also take pride in what should embarrass them. Yeah, see what I did there? I shouldn't have done that. I remember somebody one time talking about, struggling against sin. It was a youth pastor. He was talking, youth leader. He was talking about struggling against sin, and he started to give like the times when you're tempted to do, and he gave a specific example, and you want to do this thing, and he started giving details, like really precise, specific. You have it hidden in the sock drawer, underneath in the back, behind the rest of the company, where your brother can't. And everyone in the room is like, these are all like teenagers, but they're all like, these details are way not very hypothetical. Like somebody's like confessing. This is really awkward. I've heard people talk about being delivered from drugs. They used to do heroin, and God is clean and sober many years now. God has done these great things, and they start giving their testimony. They talk about how I'd take the heroin and I'd inject it into my arm, and it felt so good. And I'm sitting there going, I should try that. You're missing the point. But Jesus delivered me from it. And you're like, why? It sounded fun. We get so caught up in the pleasure of sin that when we talk about it, we get nostalgic. Be careful when you testify, because sometimes you just give people an idea, right? Ultimately here, we are told that they take pride in what should embarrass them. I used the two phrases earlier. Boys will be boys. Some of you guys, well, actually, I'm looking around. I see a few of my parents out there. So help me. Do not come to a parent-teacher conference and excuse behavior with that phrase. I will slap you. Okay, I will go Will Smith on you so fast, and I will get in jail. I will get in trouble. I'll probably go to jail. But no, boys will be boys. What are you going to do? Correct them. I'm sorry, that's just not how boys have to behave, okay? Or the easier all around, well, I'm only human. Why are you proud of that? Why are you making an excuse for your behavior and then laughing it off? But we do. I got so drunk the other night, it was embarrassing. Then why are you telling us? When I'm embarrassed about things, I don't talk about them. I don't brag about them. That's ridiculous. So ultimately, we are told not to let this happen to us, right? We should not take pride in what embarrasses us. Their glory is in their shame. Look at all the stuff that happened to me. Okay, just for a correction, by the way, just in case you're wondering, belly here is not really about food. There's a lot of dietary restrictions that the Jews had, and there was a lot of conflict between Gentile Christians and Jewish Christians, and can you eat this meat, can you eat that? Paul's not talking about that here at all. There's no context where the Philippians and food are a point. Paul is actually making a cultural reference that the Roman people would have absolutely understood. Remember, Philippi is a Roman garrison town. They actually have a lot of connection to Rome. They know all the Roman culture. They're about 50-50, half Jewish, half half Roman in their history background. So Paul is actually talking about something they would have all recognized. Okay, in the same way that you and I would immediately recognize, "Go ahead, make my day," or "May the force be with you." I mean, movie quotes, and we know exactly what's going on, right? In this case, when he starts talking about the belly, there's a bunch of little cultural references that the Romans and the Greeks would have already recognized and understood. So he uses this word. It's a weird word for Paul. He doesn't use it elsewhere. Belly, okay? There's a guy who wrote a book called Belly and Body in the Pauline Epistles. Some guy who actually wrote a whole treatise on those ideas when Paul writes. Living for the belly, according to the Romans, the way the Romans saw things, if you live for the belly, that expression basically means giving into your animal instincts. You're not even human. Greek philosophers would have argued that you're barely more than a brute living in the woods if all you do is eat whenever you're hungry. Okay? An animal eats as soon as he's hungry. I mean, leave a bowl of dog food out when you go on vacation and just see if anything's left when you come back. You leave a bag of dog food out, it'll be gone in an hour. Right? Dogs have no self-control. Okay? A person can ration. So giving into those animal instincts, when he talks about living for the belly, everyone in Philippi would be like, like an animal. They would have got that right away. The other reference would be a person who lives for the belly is a selfish, self-centered person. I mean, obviously today, but even to the Romans, they would have immediately recognized that phrase to mean he was saying they're all about themselves. They're like the seagulls from Finding Nemo. Mine, 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 mine. The belly livers are just into, I got to fill my gullet. I just got to stuff things in my mouth, okay? The other thing that would have come up is that persons devoted to their belly were considered flatterers and parasites on society. Now, I know, it took me a minute too. I was like, flatterers? Why is I'm eating chicken now, and that makes me a flatterer. See, if I want to keep filling my belly, keep my soft, easy lifestyle, I need to suck up to everyone else so you guys keep giving me food. I need you guys to take care of me because I'm not going to work for it. I just want to eat, right? So the people who live for their belly to get a gut in this world, you were basically considered someone who must be a sponge on other people. You're eating the food they don't get to eat, okay? Person living, okay, that's the idea. You have to maintain your self-living. And then finally, the Olympics issue comes up. Remember, Paul likes sports. People who live for their belly can't run. They're just not fit. If you eat whenever you want to eat, you have no discipline. Runners need discipline. Forget about the food part of it. You just need to train when it's time to train. And you can't go, I don't feel like it. I mean, really, we came back off of our Easter break, and I didn't feel like coming to school, but I have responsibilities. So I came in. I came in early that day. I was like, weird, I'm not early ever. Anyway, it contrasts with those athletes who train, who work hard. The belly part here isn't about food. It's not about body type or body shape, where there's no body shaming going on. He's basically saying, do you have self-control? These people, the enemies of the cross, do not. They do what they want, when they want, and then they just excuse it with, what am I going to do? It's just the way I am. Oh, that's the other one. Boys will be boys. I'm only human, and it's just the way I am. Oh. All right. A number of years ago, we did a skit with a psychiatrist talking to a guy who was having serious, jerk issues. He yelling at people at the Starbucks line, things like that. And the psychiatrist comes to a conclusion and says, I do see your problem. Apparently, you're obnoxious. And that's the diagnosis some of us just need. You are just obnoxious. And the guy's like, I'm obnoxious. I'm obnoxious. I'm obnoxious. You're right. I'm obnoxious. Thank you, doctor. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And everyone's like, oh, good, he learned to change his ways. He's like, I never thought about it like that. I'm obnoxious. It's not my fault. It's just the way I am. I don't have to feel bad about it anymore. And the psychiatrist like, no, that's not what I'm saying. The guy goes off going, I'm obnoxious. Like, oh, we've gone down the wrong road, haven't we? People reveling in the things they should be embarrassed by. All right. They set their mind on earthly things. I came upon one commentator, modern commentator, not an ancient one, but he said these people meditate on their own navel. Their God is themselves. You just stare at your belly button and watch it grow. Okay, I'm going to take us back to my ripcord, and we're almost done. Look at this. So Paul says, imitate me. But we were just told we've clarified they're not supposed to do that. So how did I get to that point? 1 Corinthians 11:1. 1 Corinthians 11:1. It's nice and simple, nice and short. When it pops up there, you're going to understand exactly what Paul's talking about because it's not the only time he's ever said this. In 1 Corinthians 11:1, Paul says, imitate me just as I imitate Christ. We could actually clarify that a little even better. Imitate me while I'm imitating Christ. When I'm doing the thing I'm not supposed to do, don't imitate me. When I'm doing the thing I'm not supposed to, when I don't do the thing I am supposed to do, don't imitate me. But Paul says, I have committed myself to do the best I can to imitate Christ. So if I'm imitating Christ, you can imitate me. Now, granted, it's an imitation of an imitation, but it's going to get you a step or two closer, right? Okay, I do a fairly decent Ronald Reagan. Well, but you could probably learn my Ronald Reagan, and you're not going to sound any closer to Reagan than I do, but you people will recognize it, right? Ultimately, imitate me so that, as I imitate Christ. We're called to embrace something called the cruciform life. The cruciform life. The word cruciform is a Latin term. It means shaped like a cross. We're supposed to live a life shaped like the cross, not a cross, the cross, okay? The cross doesn't simply teach us that Christ has died. We just come through Easter. You know, I learned he died. Yes, that's true, but there's more to it than that for the Christian. It teaches us how to live. We're supposed to live a certain way. Cruciform, shaped like a cross. Galatians 2:20. I'm going to rattle these off. You're not going to get to them quick enough. I'm crucified with Christ. It is no longer I that live, but Christ now lives in me. Romans 6:3. We are baptized unto his death. Romans 12:1. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice. I'm getting a trend in here. There's a way we're supposed to live. Now, a lot of people sit there going, that means we're supposed to be miserable all the time, doesn't it? What happened to joy in service? We got through a whole chapter on that. We're supposed to find that this frees us. It doesn't shackle us down. Go to Jesus' own words, red letters, Luke 9:32. If anyone wishes to follow me, he must deny himself and take up the cross daily. It's not a thing that's going to be a one and done. Oh yeah, I picked up a cross. No. Every day, follow the Christ-like path. What is the Christ-like path? What is this metaphor that we're using here? Galatians 5:24 tells us, and those who are Christ's have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. To follow a cruciform life, to be a Christian, means to take the things that you want now and now and now and put them aside and say, what do I need to do? And the interesting thing is some of those things are going to come back anyway. God doesn't sit and say you can't have money, you can't have a car, you can't have a nice house, you can't have food. But God will say, you don't need it right now. Let me give it to you when you're ready for it, because right now I need you to do something else. If Ms. Dumas assigns me a class and says, I need you to teach world history right now, and I tell her I'm really good at geography, so I think I'm going to cover that first. Like, no, this is the world history class. Yeah, but I want to teach geography because it's fun. But right now, you don't get to decide when you're going to do the things you're going to do. Okay? I know how easy it is for us to sit there going, deny yourself all pleasures. We'll all be monks. We'll live in a monastery somewhere and just not do anything, right? That's not what the Bible's calling us to do or be. We're supposed to find joy in service, but there's reward in service as well. But we are supposed to do it as we're instructed. So what are we supposed to do with this metaphor? Why are we even supposed to follow Paul's example? Paul said, follow my example. And we're like, no, but you're not supposed to follow people. But he did say, I'm trying to be like Christ. So if I can do it sometimes, so can you. We get encouraged by that. Galatians 1:8, and I'm almost done. I know some of you have to go get your kids. I meant to wear a cowboy hat. I heard they were all doing Western night. I thought we were too, but apparently not. Galatians 1:8. But even if we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than that which we have preached to you, let him be accursed. Let him be accursed. The actual term used in Greek here is anathema or anathema. Okay, anathema. Let him be accursed. I looked it up just to find out just quite what that word means. I mean, I understand what accursed is, like you're in trouble, okay? I don't know if Paul's saying to the extreme of go to hell, but maybe, okay? That's pretty extreme. But the word anathema actually comes from consecrated and holy vessels. Accursed, holy vessels that have been tainted. They're now worse than something used by a pagan because they were meant for God. And then they're used, like when Antiochus Epiphanes sacrifices a pig on God's altar. I mean, can you be any more insulting than that? The bottom line is that what we're trying to show here is that anathema means to something that was special and has become sullied. I mean, if it was already sullied, fine. I got this old nasty sweatshirt, but it used to be new. And that makes it sad. It was a collector's item. I heard about a guy one time, he had a brand new, well, not a brand new, but a very nice mint copy of Detective Comics number 27, the very first Batman comic. Very valuable. We're talking million plus, okay? He had this was years back. He had this comic, he slid it out of the little plastic sleeve. I talked about comic collecting once before. He showed it to his friend. His friend is like, oh, you know, with linen gloves on, they turned the pages to see Batman's first appearance and everything. This thing is worth $1 million, okay? This is a collectible. This is so cool. The guy went and he put it down on the glass coffee table where the iced tea had been sitting a moment ago. The water stain just knocked at least $500,000 off of it. The condition this thing was in was insanely good for something pre-World War II, and nope, not anymore, okay? This is something that was, but not anymore. Imagine God looking at you going, where'd the water stain come from? You were mint in package, and you went and got yourself a water stain. There it is, anathema. So Philippians 3 means, these verses we've been reading here in Philippians, these 3 whole verses we covered tonight. Yes. Okay, mean, here's the short version. Imitate Paul while Paul imitates Christ. And stop it when he does the wrong thing. You don't have to do, you're not trying to be Paul. You're not trying to be Pastor Frank or me, okay? Don't be me. I'm me. There's only one of me. Don't make another me. That's weird. Be you. That's what you were created to be. We're not trying to mimic everything. We're not going single white female on people here. We're going to like take our hair and make it all the same, wear the same clothes. That's what we do to idols. We're told to follow the behavior that's similar to Christ's behavior. What is that behavior? We're not supposed to follow men blindly. We can be encouraged by the behavior of others and say, I can do it too because you did it. I can do that. I'm lifted up by the fact that you're willing to do it. Philippians 3 is all about, Philippians 2 is all about joy in service. So imitation of Christ, like Paul and the others, is the highest service. We are called Christians. It means little Christs. That might sound a little offensive, like, oh, I don't know if I could be a little Christ. You're called a little Christ. Be a little Christ, right? Live like it, act like it, put others first, speak truth, be the light, seek good, do the things Christ does in his life because that's what you've been told to do. It is your reasonable service. Whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things, Paul says. He tells us to think about things that are useful. Don't worry about the things you worry about. Focus on the goodness of God. Whatsoever. Think on these things. I just snuck something in from chapter 4 that we haven't covered yet. You heard it. He said, wait a minute. So whoever gets to cover those verses, like, Mr. D already talked about that. I'm sorry about that. I just couldn't miss. I also feel like I got a little preachy there for a second. I started, instead of teaching, I'm preaching. And I'm not going to apologize for that. Okay, so Paul is telling us that we are supposed to behave a certain way. And Paul says, if you need an example of it being possible, I try. You can do this. But more to the point, be like Jesus. I'll take you back to that verse I said in Galatians a little bit earlier. If we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel than that which you've already been taught, let him be accursed. We always focus on the angel part. Even if an angel comes and talks to you. I'm thinking of you, Phony Moroni. Okay, a couple people got that. Okay, if an angel tells you a thing and it's not true, let him be accursed. But remember, it starts with the word we. Paul's like, if in my old age, if I change, if I decide I'm not going to be a Christian anymore and I start preaching some other gospel, drop me like a hot potato. You don't need, I don't know, nobody uses that phrase anymore. You don't need me. I'm wrong. If I ever change this gospel, if I'm ever preaching something that's flat out evil, don't follow me anymore. You don't have to. But while I'm being like Christ, you see an example of it's possible. Epaphroditus does it. Timothy does it. A lot of us are doing this. So be like Christ is the call we get from these three verses. I'll just give you a little bit of a highlight. The next two verses, I'll talk about the citizenship of heaven. Paul is talking about citizenship. It's a big deal to the Romans. I was really looking forward to talking about that. We're not going to get that far. But I got as far as I expected. All I have there is the verse. I really, all I wrote is the verse for it. There it is. I dropped it. So I didn't even write my notes for that one. So if I'm back another time, I'll talk about that. Pastor Frank will probably cover it next week. Let's say a quick word of prayer, and I'll get you guys out of here. Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for this day. I just thank you for the glorious things that you show us in your word. Lord, I ask that you just help us, remind us on a regular basis to live that cruciform life, that crucified flesh life, Lord, so that we can do what you would have us do, and then watch as your joy pours all over us in service. In your name we pray, amen. Have yourselves a great night. Thank you all.